The French defense. An opening as solid as a fortress and as sharp as a blade. White begins with the classic pawn to e4, staking claim in the very heart of the board, but black calmly responds with pawn to e6. A mysterious, quiet move, yet behind it lies a powerful plan. Black prepares to strike back with pawn to d5, challenging white's center with iron determination. Of course, this comes at a cost. The bishop on c8 struggles to find freedom, but the French defense is not about rushing. It is about patience, counterattack, and carefully timed explosions in the center. Let's unravel its most dangerous variations. The advanced variation. White pushes boldly with pawn to e5, grabbing space and locking black's knight away from its best square on f6. But black has no fear. The counterstrike begins with pawn to c5, a direct assault on white's stronghold. White defends with pawn to c3, holding the center together. Black piles on more pressure with knight to c6. Sometimes white tries pawn to f4, reinforcing the chain, but beware. This looks tempting, yet it is a trap. Black's queen swoops to b6, threatening both flanks at once. The battle intensifies with knight to f3, knight to h6, bishop to d3. Tension rises, pawns crumble, and suddenly black's pieces flood into the game. White is left cramped, fighting for air. The lesson? In the advanced variation, greed is punished. White's best chance is knight to f3, calmly developing. Black answers with queen to b6, and the war continues with ideas like bishop to d7, rook to c8, and knight reroutes through e7 and f5. Slowly but surely, black fights back against white's space advantage. The exchange variation. White captures on d5. Black responds in kind. Now the board is perfectly symmetrical. On the surface, calm, but beneath, danger lurks. White develops with knight to f3. Black mirrors with knight to f6. Bishops rise to d3 and d6. Castles are made. Rooks line up. The position may look equal, but do not be deceived. One slip, one miscalculation, and the symmetry shatters. Though often considered drawish, this line can explode into life when either side dares to unbalance the game. The Paulsen variation. The favorite of champions. White develops the knight to c3, leaving all options open. Black immediately challenges with knight to f6. White pushes forward with pawn to e5, and the knight retreats to d7. White reinforces with pawn to f4, but black strikes back at once with pawn to c5. The tension grows. White develops knight to f3. Black brings in knight to c6. Bishops step out. Pressure builds on the d4 square. Then comes the breakthrough. C captures d4. Knights leap, bishops develop aggressively, and soon both armies castle on opposite wings. This is no slow game anymore. It is a race. White storms forward on the king side. Black counterattacks on the queen side. The Paulsen is where battles are won by courage, not caution. The Tarrasch variation. Instead of knight to c3, white plays knight to d2. A quiet move with deep intentions. White avoids the pin from black's bishop on b4. but at the cost of restricting its own pieces. Black has two approaches: pawn to c5 for immediate tension, or knight to f6 for sharper play. In the c5 line, Black even dares to take on d5 early, holding a temporary pawn advantage while racing ahead in development. In the knight to f6 line, the game becomes a war of strategy. Pawn breaks with f6, knight maneuvers, bishops aiming at critical diagonals. It is slower, but every move is a dagger waiting to strike. The Schlechter Variation. White develops bishop to d3, quietly supporting the center. But Black must tread carefully. If Black plays knight to f6 too soon, danger arises. White advances pawn to e5. The knight retreats, and suddenly White gains a crushing space advantage. Even worse, a deadly trap appears. After a careless queen to b6, White pushes pawn to b4, sacrificing for speed, and soon Black's knight is lost to a bishop strike. So instead, the wiser path for Black is to capture in the center with pawn to d4, exchange pieces calmly, and strike later with c5 and knight to c6. The Schlechter Variation is a game of subtlety, where one misstep can be fatal. And that is the French defense, a battlefield of patience, pressure, and perfectly timed counterattacks. Whether you choose the solid exchange, the sharp Paulsen, the strategic Tarrasch, or the daring advance, each line holds its own secrets, its own traps, and its own glory. So the next time your opponent plays pawn to e4, dare to respond with pawn to e6 and step into the world of the French defense. If you enjoyed this journey through the French defense, make sure to like this video, share it with fellow chess lovers, and subscribe for more powerful openings, deadly traps, and legendary battles. Your support keeps this channel alive and growing.